We have a really great panel today of people who have been helping to move the needle forward in our state, both for a number of years, and then some really great fresh blood, so to speak, with Nora Sackett, who's doing fantastic things for our state. You know, in putting together kind of some questions for this panel, I thought about Brookings' definition of drivers of prosperity. And drivers of prosperity, according to Brookings, are human capital, infrastructure, quality of place, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And so that's where we're going to kind of focus today, obviously, is on innovation and entrepreneurship. But our state has a great opportunity to also invest in infrastructure. It's rare that a state of our size would have a $3.8 billion surplus. There's legislation being put forth relative to the Opportunity Enterprise Fund by the governor to put another $250 million into that fund. There's great opportunities here around quality of place. I mean, where else can you live with such beautiful weather? We all know that. And then also our human capital. We have tremendous opportunity through strategic investments to really build a world-class K-12 education system, but also to invest in our higher education system so that it aligns with the economic kind of vision and strategy that our state has taken on in order to diversify itself, its economy, to be not so reliant on oil and gas revenues and government. So this panel today is going to help provide insights on how we can do that, how we can work together, and how we can build on some of the things that we just talked about. But first, let me introduce the panel. I'm going to start to the left with my good friend Nora Sackett. Nora is the director of the recently expanded Office of Strategy, Science, and Technology at the New Mexico Economic Development Department, where she oversees efforts to support commercialization of New Mexico innovation, support New Mexico science and tech businesses, and secure federal funding for large-scale coalition proposals. Born and raised in Albuquerque and a proud graduate of Albuquerque High School. I know I've got some Highland High grads in this room too, so there we go. She previously served in the office of New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. And in the middle, we have Sandra Begay, and she's a Navajo engineer researcher at Sandia National Labs for 32 years. She has a BS degree in civil engineering from the University of New Mexico and an MS degree in structural engineering from Stanford. Sandra served as a UNM regent for a total of 10 years and is the current UNM Rainforest board chair. For 23 years, Sandra has provided technical assistance to U.S. tribes and is a subject matter expert on tribal energy. Sandra received the 2020 Indigenous Excellence Award, the 2009 Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, the 2007 ZIA Alumni Award, the 2005 Distinguished Engineering Alumni from the University of New Mexico, and the 2000 Stanford University Multicultural Alumni Hall of Fame Award. Dr. Richard Luarkie is a visionary leader with an impressive track record spanning over 2 decades in economic and business development leadership with roles in the Native American and Indian country. He currently serves as the CEO for Bluestone Strategy Partners, has served 2 terms as the governor for the Pueblo of Laguna, and has a strong interest in bringing tribal and Native business and economies together with the science, technology, energy, arts, and manufacturing industries, also known as STEAM. Dr. Luarkie has earned a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of New Mexico, an MBA from New Mexico State University, and a PhD from Arizona State University. So let's welcome our panel, and we're really anxious to hear your insights. So, yes, applause is appropriate. So this question first goes to Nora. So Nora, one of the major goals of our state's economic development strategy is to build a 21st century economy that is so dependent upon oil and gas revenues. So the question is what role do you see the Office of Science and Technology playing in achieving that goal? And what are some of the initiatives that Economic Development Department is taking on in these regards?
Absolutely. So to crib a little bit off of Speaker Martinez, it is something that you hear everybody talk about. We have to diversify our economy. To be fair, we hear everybody talk about it because it is a must do. Our state economists have predicted that we have about 10 more years of current oil and gas revenue projections before things really start to drop off. So we sometimes feel we're working under a bit of a timeline. It's critical. And how my office is working on that is to grow the state's science and tech sectors. We are working to grow also the ecosystems sort of around those sectors, right? For example, in Boston, bioscience, or the research triangle of North Carolina, if you leave one firm in a certain sector, there is another firm that can pick you up. We haven't quite reached that stage yet in a lot of our science and tech, and that's a really critical stage to reach for continued growth of our science and tech sectors. For a little context, my office focuses on 5 sectors: aerospace, biosciences, advanced computing, which can include cybersecurity, quantum, AI, et cetera, sustainable green energies and climate tech, and intelligent manufacturing. You may say, that sounds like a lot. It is. It is 5 of our 9 state target industries at the Economic Development Department, where my office is housed. And previously, the Science and Tech Office has been one person for several administrations. So one of the things we have done under the leadership of Governor Lujan Grisham to advance science and tech sector growth, and specifically startup growth in New Mexico, is to expand the Office of Science and Tech. So it has tripled in size recently. My 2 wonderful team members are here. I'm going to call them out. We have Jeff Hall over here and Lee Greschel over here in the back. With that added capacity, really for de-siloing, which has been a great topic of conversation today. I'm so glad, because it's really important. And for added coalition building, which is really important for securing a lot of our federal funds. And also for an added entrepreneurship focus. We heard Minority Leader Lane talk about EDD's establishment of an Office of Entrepreneurship. Lee is helping us get that set up. We hope to grow that additionally in the future. We also are adding financial opportunities for our New Mexico startups. So we recently closed, well, let me back up. We have 2 existing ongoing grant opportunities that my office oversees, a science and tech business startup grant and a SBIR matching grant. And we recently added 2 new ones, an Advanced Energy Award pilot program and a higher ed team science and tech commercialization award, with a shout out to Lisa and Kara and UNM Rainforest, who we are very happy to be partnering with for the administering of those 2 awards. Those are both also much larger than our previous existing grants. So we are really looking to find ways to dial up the non-dilutive funds that the state is able to provide to assist our local startups in getting over that valley of death gaps. We're also working to take full advantage of our federal funding opportunities. So that is one of the focuses that I have. We have a lot of incredible groups and coalitions working to secure federal funding. There is oodles of federal funding opportunities right now with the multitude of bills that have passed, which is great, but we need to work together to secure those. And one of the governor's budget agenda items is $100 million to launch the New Mexico Match Fund, which would provide funding availability to serve as the match funds for those large-scale federal funding opportunities. This would be huge. It's something we've really run into as an obstacle as we've tried to apply for these funding opportunities, is the state departments just haven't had a pool of funds set aside to serve as match funds. And that flexibility is really critical to being able to be competitive for those. One other thing I just want to mention from the governor's agenda as well, that some folks may have heard about, as it's a large number, is $500 million for a strategic water supply. What does that have to do with science and tech startup growth, you might wonder. But what that is going to do is establish a water source, brine and produced water included heavily, for an opening for clean hydrogen production, energy storage, manufacturing that is water intensive. So by sort of planting that flag, it is not only strategically important because we are an arid state and we need that water as moving forward, but it's also innovative and putting New Mexico on the map as something new. There's a ton of interest in New Mexico for clean hydrogen production, but also clean hydrogen technology, and having that additional resource as an entry point, both for companies that want to come here and grow, but also as a resource for New Mexico companies that need that additional entry point or additional support is going to be really critical.
Great, thanks, Nora. So I heard two calls to action there. One, to support the $100 million state match for grants. I think we saw, or people that looked at it, under the Build Back Better program and the regional innovation engines, that having that state grant is really an important part, I think, in the decisions that are being made, because it leverages federal funds and it also shows a strong commitment from the state. The other is the $500 million. A lot of people would think that economic development is driven by water. And in a lot of ways, it is. If you don't have water and resources, you're really not going to have economic development. So when we say a call to action, what do? Well, you got to talk to the appropriators in our state, and that's the legislature. And I'm sure that the panelists of the panel of legislators pointed out that fact. They're the ones that write the checks, build the budgets, make the commitments, and tell us how we're going to spend some $3.8 billion worth of the surplus. So we've heard what the state is doing. I'm going to kind of switch up now and ask Sandra, to look at and talk a little bit about some of the federal programs that she's working on, but also others that she might be aware of. And one of those is in her role at Sandia National Labs. She's been exposed to a number of federal programs around entrepreneurship, innovation, and some of those opportunities that could really accelerate innovation and entrepreneurs in our state. And one such DOE program is Boost. So, Sandra, could you discuss what the Boost program is and what it could mean for New Mexico entrepreneurs and innovators?
Sure. So the Boost program is fairly new, but there's actually been at least several interactions in New Mexico with New Mexico communities and communities in Alaska. Essentially, it's the Department of Energy and Sandia looking at their technology and commercialization products to help communities have access and be knowledgeable what they could tap into. But it begins with a conversation. So I'm an internal advisor to the Boost program. And one of the things I suggested early on is if you're going to work with communities, especially in Alaska and New Mexico, you've got to learn how to have a good conversation so that you learn not to just ask questions, but to listen. And so the team went through a facilitated session on how you build good conversations. And I thought that did the team well, in that when they went out into the two state communities, they were able to hold sessions that were facilitated, organized, good notes, and they were focused in on listening what the community needs were. And from that, they were able to determine, there's a couple of pockets of commercialization products or IP from DOE or Sandia that might match what the community needs to develop. So it's interesting, that's a similar program to what I've been doing for 23 years, which is technical assistance for tribes. If you don't know this, there's two mechanisms at Sandia Lab. You can either be in a big program that gets funded, long-term R&D research, national security, or on the other side of the shop where I fall in is you're an entrepreneur, because you don't necessarily fall into a program, but you use skills and abilities to find your own customer. And so I was able to do that with the 2005 Energy Policy Act. There was a provision for Indian energy, and that's where I jumped on. This is a new customer, they're gonna get money. Sandy wants to be a part of that team, and I've been able to lead that for 23 years. So when you talk about entrepreneurial, you can't do that with the federal government. You find the new pockets of money and try to help with technology. And so there has been a 20-year memorandum of understanding between Sandia Labs and the Navajo Nation that finished in the early 2000s. Around the pandemic timeframe is when it ended. And then a year ago in December, the Department of Energy, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Interior, the EPA signed an MOU with the Navajo Nation, and Sandia is one of the players to help enact all of these strategies that have taken place for a year. And so I'm in the middle of trying to help where these strategies fit with proposals, facilitating meetings, as I said, listening, understanding where technologies could help further this. So it's exciting that I'll be interviewed by the DOE at the end of this month to see if Navajo Nation can get a big grant for photovoltaics. So cross our fingers and make sure I got my best cap on to answer their questions. But as you can see what was talked about, the tribes have to be organized in their strategies, know what pockets are there, and then get the application in. But in the end, be competitive. Although the MOU helps the nation, the tribe, they still have to have a competitive proposal. And so I'm glad the end of this month we'll see if this happens with some solar farms that will be installed. Or the other example would be like a Hickory Apache. They did it without any federal funds because they had the will and the way. They put in 50 megawatts worth of solar. City of Albuquerque has bought some of that power. PNM's part of that. So when we talk about clean energy economy, the tribes are in the forefront of doing that. Either they fielded these solar farms or they're on the cusp of dealing with that. So I think it's really interesting that the federal boost program matches what the Department of Energy's Indian Energy has done through technical assistance. It's just further on of commercialization and IP products that could be used by those communities. So they complement each other. And I think it's really good news when there's a generation worth of money out there, that the clock is ticking. I think we have a good solid year left to try to get that money into Indian country and state of New Mexico rural areas. Last point I want to make, there's an earlier conversation. I am a product of the federal early education program called Head Start. I never acknowledged that when it was brought up by the state legislators. It is so important, and it made a big difference for all the Indian kids that got into Head Start. I mean, I got a big lift as a little kid to open my eyes and experience things that has helped me throughout my years. And last thing, for Native students going into STEM, you have to understand that it takes a lot of support, not only family and relatives, but scholarships and fellowships. So I would not have gotten all this education that you read off without the support of scholarships and fellowships, because there's very few Native women in engineering. So I was able to get funding for that. So that's a big help to say, you're gonna have to seed some of this if you wanna see it. And it may be as little as a scholarship, or as I mentioned before, side by side with as a mentor or an intern. Thank you.
Thank you. I loved your comment, the will and the way. I think that describes a lot of what we have to do in New Mexico. Is we have to have the will and we have to find the way if we're going to move the needle and progress as a state. So I think what I heard the call to action really is, since Sandra's dealing at a federal level from an appropriation point of view, we really need to be attuned to those programs that are occurring out of our federal legislators, our senators, and our representatives, and really support those actions that are going to benefit New Mexico, our Native American tribes, and others. So thank you, Sandra. I appreciate that. So Richard, I kind of switched up the order here, but since you're on the end of the dais here, I heard this in the last presentation about silos. I think there is probably discussion in other groups about silos. We do tend in New Mexico to speak with one voices. And I'm hopeful that through groups like this, we can figure out how to speak more coherently with one voice. So my question to you, Richard, is, our state really doesn't have a strong track record or culture that encourages collaboration or celebrating entrepreneurial success. How can entrepreneurs be the catalyst for building a 21st century economy for our state?
Well, thank you, Dale, and excuse me, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to be here. be a part of the panel here. It's good to see us looking out in the room and the eyes are still open, so that's a good thing. After lunch, that's a good thing. Thank you, everybody. So I'm chalking that up to you want to hear what we have to say. So, well, thanks for the question, Dale. You know, as I think about this and honing in on that word culture, when I look at things, I think that in particular to New Mexico, does our culture, and I'm not talking just tribal or community, just culture in general, does it actually serve as a deficit or an inspiration for an entrepreneurial community for that ecosystem we're trying to reach? The reason I say that, when I think about it in terms of my own native language, we don't have a word for poverty, but we got words for abundance. We got words for growth. We even have ayush chenyi, meaning profit, literally profit. Yet the culture limits us because we're impoverished, I guess, right? But is it here or is it in our wallet? I think in my mind, where we're at right now is we really need to take the time to reimagine the culture, in particular the entrepreneurial culture of New Mexico. And I don't categorize that by indigenous or Hispanic or whatever of New Mexico. I look around this room and there's incredible talent here. Incredible talent. But we don't engage it or celebrate it. We look for this equation of 1 + 1 needs to equal 2 versus 1 + 1 needs to be greater than 2. We need to have a chemical equation, not a mathematical equation. We need a reaction, right? And so I think about that because scarcity thinking puts us in a mathematical equation, right? Versus abundance of thinking puts us in a chemical reaction, right? We're talking about impact, but are we talking about impact in 2 inches of water or a lake or an ocean? Right now, we seem to be satisfied with impact in 2 inches of water. We need to change that. But you can't do that without collaboration. So that's where I think the silos become the weakening points, right? And maybe even, unfortunately, the culture embraces silos. And so that culture needs to be modified, needs to be mutated, right? I'm not a scientist, I'm using science words, so if I screw up, I apologize, right? But I think that's gonna be really important. I think about, again, that genius. So they tell us, at least in our Pueblo teachings, they talk about Chaco Canyon, right? Tinititkaya. There, we're familiar with that sun symbol, right? That's there. They tell us, our ancestors, that was their markings or their metric, if you will, their data points of when they were figuring out the solstice. They were making their marks. We know today that the moon and the sun, they move in 9-year cycles, right? So it wasn't just a couple guys sitting down over the weekend with a 6-pack of beer to figure this out, right? There was a period of time, probably maybe a couple of generations, that it took to figure this out. So I always tell when I get the opportunity to talk to young people and just even folks in our community, one thing that is an incredible example of intergenerational data transmission. it's also an incredible, one of the, at least in my mind, one of the first examples of big data analytics. So we come from a long line of genius, and it's dispersed here in our state. That's why I think when I hear the call to action, we need to take the time to be able to unpack what we mean by intention, unpack great intention and translate that into action. They did it back then. Do we still have the ability to do it now? I believe we do. And so I think right now, the call to action is to begin unpacking good intention and start actually taking action. Right? So that's how I think about it. And I think very specific to the question of how do entrepreneurs be the catalyst for 21st century economy, they're the unpackers. They're the doers. They're the action makers. And so I think that's where we're at right now. And I think also as we look at growth, not only entrepreneurs, but I think New Mexico in general, we have deep roots from the tribal side, from the Spanish side in the 1500s, Mexican in 1700s. You know, we have deep roots here of families, generations. That's an asset, not a divider. It's an asset. And by saying that, we need to think in terms of 7 generations, not rounds. We need to build long term. So in my mind, that's how I believe entrepreneurs can be catalysts, by engaging them and supporting them to be the interpreters of great intention to action, to allow and celebrate their genius and innovation. Programs and governments are all great and useful, but they're not necessarily the doers.
Well, thanks, Richard. What can I say after that? So I think what I heard was our call to action is to take action. Nobody's going to do it for us in New Mexico. And I think that we have a long history of being overcomers. Overcomers when it comes to drought, overcomers when it comes to the many trials and tribulations that we have as a society and as a state. So our call to action is to take action. So thank you, Richard, for that. So kind of the next question is building on this whole notion of how do we work together to get things done? And, you know, sometimes in New Mexico, probably not unique to New Mexico, but probably something that many communities and states have had to overcome, is that we have a hard time working across silos. In a world where collaboration and efficient use of resources is paramount, that's going to be the next, I think, call to action, is how do we efficiently use what we have and do the most with it? So what ideas, Nora, since you're here to my left, you are looking at me very nicely, what ideas do you have that would create a mindset of collaboration amongst all of the players in our entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think, you know, from the state's perspective, there are times when the state needs to step up to lead, to help centralize, and there are times when the state needs to get out of the way and let the private sector lead and help centralize. And we maybe don't always call those shots right. So in terms of what, my office and department can work on and do, we've had several instances where I think we have found opportunities for the state to be an aggregator. Perhaps we're not leading the charge, we're not writing the ideas. Often, a lot of times, the ideas should be coming from the private sector in this because they're the ones who are identifying the needs, right? But we can lead the sort of aggregation of people, of work, of thoughts, and we have found some opportunities to do that since we've expanded the OSST, specifically with a lot of federal funding opportunities that have been great opportunities to work on. It's so interesting to me that I think almost every panel today has talked about the need for de-siloing. I think that conversation has increased a lot recently. I've heard a lot more talk about it recently, which I think is a good sign because it's on everybody's radar. It's not a mystery that we need to be doing that, and naming something is the first step in that direction. So I think that's really great. In terms of some practical applications, something that's been on my mind, and I'm going to try and sort of thread the needle here between Lisa and between Steve from AFF earlier. Ohio did something interesting a few years ago with their higher ed institutions called Ohio IP Promise, where they standardized their licensing at their higher ed institutes across the state. So it created a sort of a single entry point for licensing that, VCs and entrepreneurs didn't have to look through different processes at each one. Obviously, Ohio has a great many more higher ed institutes than New Mexico does. But as an example of a way that the state can help perhaps bring folks to the table to streamline in that sense of de-siloing, that's an example of some of the things that I'm looking at bringing folks together to talk about.
De-siloing. That's an interesting word in itself. Sandra, what are your thoughts on this?
So I really appreciate it with the Rainforest Board. It's an open group that I can have dialogues with different board members, and then we think about how to bring action to the board. But my most valuable conversations are every 2 or 3 weeks with Lisa. And we start thinking about where can this organization be the pebble that starts the circles in a still pond. And with the Rainforest's mission, we're doing really well at that. But to further that to where there may be gaps or no attention, no acknowledgement, has been with our tribal communities. And so Lisa found a grant through EDA to focus in on tribal entrepreneurship. There was no data. Anecdotally, we talk about it amongst ourselves, but having a team of entrepreneurs to go out and field visit different entrepreneurs and collect that data, we now have a data set after about a year saying these are the hindrances of what tribal entrepreneurs have to go through to just establish your business. And you heard that from several panelists today. But it's the start of leveraging what you know and know well to look at a different customer set that maybe has not had that attention nor even acknowledgement. And I think that's been the success of these entrepreneurs that you've seen in the last couple of days. And now we know there's a venture fund that's created for our indigenous communities. But part of that is having on the ground these folks that are in their community, like Zachariah Ben, Magina Lee, to just go talk with who they know. And it's just like what the venture capitalists are saying, we need to have a conversation. Here's the gap of what you need in your business because honest conversation, you may not have the skill to do this, so you need a finance person. That's the kind of encouragement they give to each other. And to have that program excel and then having more people involved, I think is very helpful that it's brought attention to. There are some unique challenges that this particular type of group and in New Mexico needs some lift. So it's that number I keep hearing, the 40%. Yes, there is the 40%. And yes, we're going to give up attention to 100%. But sometimes the 40% have such unique challenges that nobody knows about until you ask them. And that's, again, listening, that you can then try to address that with the resources that you have. And, you know, with the EDA giving funds to this, I told my board, you know, we were competitive. We got that grant. We're accountable. We're taking metrics. It's not a social thing. It's not a goodwill thing, although you see that and feel that these are legitimate businesses. We're collecting the information, the numbers, putting charts together, having people do podcasts. So please listen to the Rainforest podcast on tribal entrepreneurism. We got a segment by Richard, you got a segment by me. We're all trying to help teach in a way that's novel, which is by storytelling, which we talked about earlier today. How can you help a business that's just starting? Why do you want to start a business? Richard talks about that. What is your focus? What gives you the passion to bring your business to life? The podcasts, I think, have been very well received in the groups that access them, which would be Native people who might want to stay on the reservations or maybe near a border town, that it gives them that insight from a one-on-one of those of us who've done different things in our life. We can actually talk about that. So it's interesting to be able to understand where Rainforest is secured in its mission to help UNM with its IP. And I tell people, you need to be very afraid of the University of New Mexico. If you do not get a license and you steal our IP, we are going to go after you. And I don't think many people know this. UNM has done license assertion for a long time, and we've been very successful, enough to have an endowment. And so nationwide, you must be afraid, because we will sue you if you infringe on our patents. So that's a capstone that we build off of. That's what we have as our, you know, we look to the future. How can we bring more new money? I used to tell my board of regents, we got new money. It's from assertion licensing. So let's quit talking about the pot of money that doesn't ever change and we get it year after year and it goes up and goes down. I like to talk about new money. And so I'd always bring that up to them about assertion licensing, because we have our professors that develop their IP and then do licensing and maybe startups. It's exciting stuff.
Wow, I didn't know about that assertion licensing. So be afraid. Thanks, Sandra. Richard, how do we change that mindset to have more of a mindset around collaboration and breaking down silos?
I think, you know, for me, having served in a tribal leadership role, having been in the private sector, having my own firm, working for firms, one of the things that in New Mexico we need to get away from is being afraid of each other. Don't fear one another. And part of that comes from education. When I look at it from the tribal side, you hear from that side of the fence, maybe companies or firms that may not want to work with a tribe or on tribal lands because it's too hard, or you can't, you know, the sovereign immunity and all these kind of things. But tribes haven't done a good job of educating why it's easier, right? A lot of companies don't know, often tribes and tribal companies will waive sovereignty, or a limited amount of sovereignty. It's not a bad thing. The other side of that is, you know, I think on the entrepreneurial side, finding opportunities that bring the entrepreneurs together in a manner that is not siloed, but is really driven by economy drivers. Right. And so for me, like right now, I look at things like, say, like gaming, hospitality, cigarette sales. Those are all things that tribes do now and do well. And gaming's done well for tribes. Gaming's created jobs, but it hasn't created careers. In my mind, I'm very intrigued, and I'm glad Nora's on the panel here, because I'm very, very intrigued with how do we create a steam-powered economy, focusing on science, technology, energy, arts, manufacturing. Or maybe we turn that word around, right? We put the S at the end of the word and we make it teams, but team S squared, right? Because now we have space. But teams also implies collaboration. And those are the industries we go after. So I think it's bringing people with like interests as well together. The last thing I'll say is on the silo piece, you know, and the scarcity thinking, we're like, I see this little 10-foot tub here with, you know, 3 feet deep of water that the horses water themselves in, right? Or water. We're in this tub, you know, splashing around, gasping for air, thinking we're drowning. Just stand up. Stand up and get out of it, right? And let's either find a much bigger tub that we can all fit in, or let's go find a lake that we can all work in together. But we're so protective of our own little tub. And so those are the things that I think we need to be thinking about when we look at collaborating and breaking down silos. Again, when I look at history and I look at not only our tribes, but again, you know, the coming of the Spanish and the Mexican and the federal government, there were rough times, but none of us would be in existence today if we weren't able to figure out how to work together, at least here in New Mexico. And I think there's power in that. We're still here. We're still using our languages. Those are things that I think are powerful. And to me, that builds collaboration. That breaks down silos. Because now we can begin to know each other better. And I think on the last piece, you hear a lot about sovereignty. Again, you know, in our language, we don't have a word that directly translates to mean sovereignty. But you could use a word like, at least in our language, like meaning like our way of being, our culture of being, existing and coexisting. I think we need to, in that, understand that that also implies responsibility to do, going back to the action. So I think that's a really important piece, because as a state, we really can't be sovereign, or tribes, or even entrepreneurs. We can't be sovereign until we have some independence. You can't have independence unless you have some resource. Else you're going to always be dependent on someone else's resources. And they'll tell you what you need to do with their resources and how and why. So in my mind, getting to that sovereignty is everybody's responsibility. And that will require collaboration. That will require breaking down of silos. That will require working together. And that will require leveraging one another's genius.
So let's leverage our genius and see where we go from here. You know, I was sitting here thinking, you know, I wonder if they're having discussions like this in Artesia or Clayton, New Mexico, or Clovis or Farmington, or, you know, are these discussions just a Central Valley discussion around Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Los Alamos? Or how do we take this discussion to the broader audience in New Mexico? Because we're all in the same boat when it comes to a need to diversify our economy away from oil and gas. We're all in the same boat when it comes to wanting to enhance our education system, K through 12. We're all in the same boat when it comes to trying to figure out what our vision is going to be for the future and how we're going to create that vision and invest in it today. So that would be, I think, a call to action for this group is how do we reach out across the state and have a broader discussion around innovation, entrepreneurship, and what it means to all communities in our state. And I know Nora's been working on those kinds of things, and I have great hopes that the Office of Entrepreneurship won't be just viewed as an urban thing. that only Albuquerque and Las Cruces and Santa Fe and others can tap into, but it will be seen as an opportunity for all of those entrepreneurs in all nooks and crannies of our states, with all backgrounds, cultures, and peoples, see that as an opportunity to grow and thrive.
Can I give a quick example?
You sure may.
So
I was teeing that up for you right there.
Thank you. Lee, I'm gonna spotlight you for a minute, is our new entrepreneurship coordinator. And he spent the first few days of the new year in Hobbs, including going through a slaughterhouse, I'm pretty sure. And he was meeting with Mayor Cobb and business leaders in Hobbs and the area, specifically to talk about entrepreneurship growth in food processing, and how they can establish an incubator, or an entrepreneurship runway for additional food processing business growth, which is an existing industry down there but has room to grow. And how they can connect beef producers and beef processors with schools for locally grown and processed meat for school meals. So there is a whole sort of growing network of food entrepreneurship in statewide, but also in the Hobbs area, that Lee and our Healthy Foods, I'm going to forget her exact title, but Erin Ortigosa is our Healthy Foods czar at EDD, who works on connecting communities with healthy foods and the entrepreneurship angle of that as well. So that's a great example of exactly what you're saying of we do need to be having these conversations about entrepreneurship and economic diversification and growth in every community, and there's opportunity in every community that the state works to support and needs the support of others to grow as well.
So that's kind of a call to action right there, is for all of us to use our networks that are not just local but statewide to broadcast these opportunities and to create these connections that we do have in our state that are growing and hopefully thriving, and won't be reinvented every 2 to 4 years when we have a change in leadership, but that they're sustainable and they're seen as part of that whole ecosystem. So this is a question I always like to ask really smart people that I'm with, and it's what I call the magic wand question. Or if you were king or queen for a day, what would you propose that we do to move the needle in our state? And so Sandra, what ideas, and if you had the magic wand, what can we do as a state to substantially grow our entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem?
I think the first thing you have to understand, sometimes you have to create that wand yourself and not go get it from somebody. So that's part of the entrepreneurial thing. I'll give you an example. I started the program with Office of Indian Energy early on. It was just me. And I could tell that there was room for growth, technical help, small budget, minuscule budget. I was doing work for a lot of people in order to focus in on Indian Energy. And I think many of you have heard me say this before, but I needed support fast. And I needed to make sure, as a structural engineer working in energy now, that I not electrocute myself. I'm pretty smart, right? So I looked at a book by Winona LaDuke, who is a leader in clean energy and green energy within the nation. And she had this book, and I looked at one chapter focused on Debbie Tewa. Debbie is Hopi. She's been in the field. She's put in rural solar on Hopi and Navajo. And I thought, now there's the woman who can teach me not to electrocute myself. And she knows a lot more than I do in this work of grassroots off-grid solar, because that's where my start got. So she happened to be in school. Sandia, we can hire interns pretty quick. We pay them a lot less than staff members, to be honest. They're a lower budget, faster to get in. So Debbie was my first intern, and I stayed with her. She stayed with me till she graduated. Now Debbie is part of a startup company in Arizona called Native Solar, and they are Native Solar. They do, 3 of my interns created a nonprofit, very ingenious, 3 women, 3 Native women. So they build off-grid systems for Navajo and Hopi. They actually do the manufacturing. So if you create it, the wand, I just started with a little sprinkle here, a little sprinkle there, and that's how you start things. I keep trying to remind people, just be the one stone that makes that water move. And after time, you'll see those ripples. I've had the 50th intern after 22 years, PhD in sustainability. A lot of graduate students, they're either academic professors teaching wind at NAU, teaching sustainability and water resources at the University of New Mexico, starting nonprofits. One of my interns is the Navajo Tribal Utility Renewable Energy Engineer. Now, did this start with a big wand? No, it started with just a little bit. Starting it, being consistent, and as I said earlier, start collecting the data. Why is this important? It's because I'm seeding the next generation of tribal leaders who are going to lead clean energy, because I could see that's where we were headed and that's where we are. I can't do it myself. I'd like to retire someday. Go forth and do good, and maybe you can come do my job for me at some point. But part of that, as I said earlier, I told the intern, let's jump in the car, let's go. We went to visit a tribe in California I had no connection with. I talked to the tribal leaders and the project manager, who was a tribal council member. Tell me about this wind farm you just built. And as you go out and think, not so complicated, keep it simple, keep your relationships close, ask questions, develop a rapport so that I can come back with 3 or 4 other interns, teach them the same lesson. Now, over 22 years, there's certain tribes we visit every year because they love to see those students. They want to talk to the younger generation. They want to have questions asked of them. They want to tell them what's real and not real. Time is different with tribal projects. That's the first thing the students learn. It's going to take a lot longer. It's more complicated, but don't be afraid. We're going to do this together. And I think that magic wand can be as simple as you want to make it. It's the desire to teach somebody else besides yourself. And it doesn't always have to cost you a lot of money. You may need to do some time with mentoring, but you will find after time, they will come back to you and say how grateful they are because you gave them the leg up over time. And they're kicking butt. My interns are professionals. They're kicking butt all across the United States. And when you want to talk about natives in STEM, I know most of them by name because it's a small pool. That's okay. People accuse me sometimes of cherry picking. Hey, doesn't everybody else cherry pick? Why not me? I think that it's giving the intern, the person to learn a leg up of what it's like to do what you're doing today. And as I said before, get them in conversations where they may not say a word, but they're listening, they're absorbing, and they will learn what it's like to be a professional in a very confrontational meeting, an important negotiation, important way to share your vision with a customer or client. They need to know what that's like because they won't experience until they're at the deep end of the pond and you don't want them to drown. And so I think that's where you hear me say that the wand is not that hard. You put the magic into it.
Thank you. What I heard is she's an entrepreneur, a human capital entrepreneur. Thank you. Richard, create your wand for us and make it magic.
Okay, let's see. Well, I think in my mind, the wand is simplicity. We tend to think about, maybe because of the types of institutions we have here, we have some pretty incredible institutions. But I think there's power in simplicity. And what I mean by that is we need to re-embrace and re-legitimize the trades. Plumbing, HVAC, those can be some pretty powerful businesses. But we tend to go to bioscience or whatever right out the gate, right? But some of these plumbers and these guys are great. And we saw from COVID, the ones that were working were those guys, right? They kept us going. So I think it's really important to think about that there's power in simplicity. I think the other part of that is also low-hanging fruit. I don't know if Narissa's still here, but we're talking earlier about federal contracting. We have 2 national labs, incredible national labs that are known worldwide. Actually, I guess maybe 3 Air Force Research Labs. We have military bases. We have great institutional education institutions, UNM, New Mexico Tech, New Mexico State. And in my mind, the federal contracting world, this should be a mecca for that. New Mexico should be a mecca. Right, you know, and so because they need all those services, everything from plumbing, HVAC. I mean, they call it right now, I think on the military side, right, they call those BOSS contracts, base operations support, taking care of roads, taking care of the buildings, all that kind of stuff, all the way to quantum computing. So I think we have a huge, huge market here. So the magic wand, in my mind, is building on building on simplicity, building on the low-hanging fruit, building on what we have. Because if you think even about the title of our panel and looking at new opportunities, that's great. But what have we done with the current opportunities? Right. So I think that's real critical. And I think the last piece of sprinkle in that magic wand, you know, they tell us again at our pueblo, the people, the people are magic. But it's not a magic of pick a card, any card. It's a magic of amuj omis to love each other, tinyech omis respect each other, bashuch omis be mindful of each other, don't hurt each other. It's so easy that it's hard. If we can all work together, imagine the magic that will come from that. Back to the silo breaking down and the collaboration. So it's not all just technical skill, it's the human piece, human sprinkle of magic too, that is going to be important. So that would be my wand.
Thank you, Richard. Nora, close it out here before we go to questions.
Oh, goodness. All right. First of all, let me just say it's very difficult to be on stage with such, there's like poetry coming from my stage members next to me, and I don't quite have that, so sorry. Let's see. Mine are going to be a little bit more practical. I would say one would be more Series B funding for New Mexico startups. My current boss, John Clark, is soon to be the new boss at the SIC, and this is something that is on his radar to work on specifically, and I'm very excited about that opportunity. Harold Lavender spoke earlier about over the past few years, how the SIC has amped up their direct investment in New Mexico VC and making sure those dollars are getting to New Mexico startups. And I think there's a lot more room to grow that. And I think that's critical for supporting our early stage New Mexico startups, but also our later stage New Mexico startups so that they can stay here. Because if they start here, that's excellent, but they need to be able to stay here, grow here, and be funded here. We know that there are state resources and incentives that are not available for some of our earliest stage companies. I wish I had a magic wand to fix that because it requires going to the legislature. So I would love a excuse to not have to do that. But those are important gaps that need addressing, and looking at how other states are doing those in ways that we can either emulate or reinvent for our own improvement. So I would say more funding, more resources, continued growth. I'll say one more thing. We are seeing progress, and we're talking about diversifying our economy, and we are seeing major progress. Somebody talked about Maxion earlier, and I think Maxion sets up a great example. So Maxion's going to make solar panels and solar cells. Array Technologies is also expanding. They make the solar tracking technology. We have sort of coming together of like a whole solar, massive supply chain line right there. I would love to see that built out with additional New Mexico grown companies in every of my 5 sectors, right? What else could we do to sort of build out the full supply chain line in aerospace, in bioscience, et cetera? That would be my magic wand. And my last one I'll say is it's another thing that other folks have talked about, that not only the rest of the country and the world would know about all the things we have going on here, but also people in the state, because there's a lot that we have doing that our fellow New Mexicans don't know about. Did you know we have the largest wind job training center in, I think, the world is in Tucumcari. That's just one example. We have so many examples like that. Did you know that most of the solar cells that power satellites in space are made in Albuquerque at Solero, now known as Rocket Lab? We have incredible examples of innovation and growth here, and we need to bring them up to the surface so that folks know what is going on here and how much room there is to grow.
Great, thanks, Nora. Excellent work, panel. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and kind of keeping us on track here. We got 13 minutes left, and so we're open for any kind of questions. Clifton.
All aware of more of these things. I'm just curious if there might be an opportunity at the state to revamp the fairgrounds and put up a entrepreneurial exhibit or something like that, where we could bring in a lot of these different people and put that display on par with agricultural displays.
Good idea. Any other questions? Bob?
Yeah, you weren't here earlier when I didn't ask the question, according to Stu. But I said, why don't we brag about all the good stuff that we do? And we suffer from the Oppenheimer big secret. We can't tell anybody about anything. And we need to tell everybody about everything. Richard and Ms. Begay, your philosophical statements are wonderful, and I think it boils down to New Mexico's caring about New Mexicans. We need to care about one another. We're so diverse, but we are siloed as people. We need to get rid of those silos first before we can go brag about everything and everybody that's here. We need to be proud of what we've done. We need to be proud of this history and culture. We need to be proud that the Taos Pueblo has been here 1,200 years. I mean, that says a lot. We don't brag about it. I don't understand it. So again, there's no question here. There's a statement about can we care about one another enough so it emanates out of the state? And people come here because we're a caring community, we're a smart community, and we have a lot to brag about.
Thanks, Bob.
Gosh, and
Is
it on? Yeah,
Yes.
it's on. So mine is a real technical question. It seems like there's a big opportunity coming forward about recycling lithium batteries. Is that something New Mexico can do? It doesn't look like it needs a lot of water. It needs a lot of energy. I'm not an engineer, so.
Well,
Yes.
Nora's good to know.
If you would like to start a business recycling lithium batteries, come talk to Jeff or Lee or myself. Yeah, absolutely. In all seriousness, yes, there are relevant tax credits in the IRA specifically to battery recycling and critical minerals recycling and critical minerals reuse. And we are beginning to see a little bit of that of sort of interest and activity. I would say it's small at this point, but is one of the things that's going to continue to grow with our focus on climate tech and sustainable energy.
And in addition to lithium batteries, there's also wind blades. They have a useful life of 20 years. You can't put them in a landfill because they use asbestos as a binding agent. So those could be recycled. as well as the, how many millions of solar panels are they going to make at Maxion that in 20 years, they can't end up in landfills either. They've got aluminum, glass, silicon, all sorts of other things could be recycled. I think there's a huge industry opportunity for New Mexico with our heavy railroads that we have here and where a lot of the batteries are used and manufactured or on the East Coast or the West Coast. So yeah, that's an industry that can employ a lot of people, do a lot of good, and it creates the circular economy. And that's going to be on the top of mind of most corporations, companies, states. How do you go from womb to tomb and back to womb with all of the natural resources that we deploy and put into products and things? So yes, I think there's huge opportunity, and I think you can start a business. It's right now, there's probably some people here that would like to meet with you to discuss that. So that's great.
Hi, my name is Trish. This is kind of directed towards Dale, but really to all of you. I've had to work today, so I can only hear some of what's being said, but for the most part, I feel like we're also already doing a lot of great things in New Mexico, don't you think? There's always been this focus of like, let's bring in other people, let's show people what we're, and I'm just like, who cares what they see or don't see? I think it's this really great secret that we don't have insane traffic like LA and Chicago and places like that. I think we have the huge grit, you know, just based on growing up here. There's like so many things to be proud of, and I really think we are growing from within and not having to be like any other city or state. So I was just wondering what you folks see in terms of that. Like, would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that we've proven over centuries that we're a resilient people. And you can see it everywhere in our cultures, in our natives, communities, and in our city itself. And so, you know, can we adapt to the future? Can we, in my opinion, can we make strategic investments in the future with what we've been given with a $3.8 billion surplus that they're projecting will be for another 5 years? And can we put that and deploy that into industries in a future vision that makes New Mexico kind of the unseen, seen leader? Because that's what our history is about with our national labs. A lot of stuff happens behind the fence. We don't know about it, but it happens. And then it gets out into the world. And so, yeah, I personally think New Mexico is at the precipice of a great new beginning in a lot of ways, but it's built on a foundation of history and culture and authenticity. How unique. Film's a good example. And film also proves out, in my opinion at least, and you guys talk about this too, is that if you want to start an industry, sometimes you have to seed it. And, you know, I think what the industry is probably about $100 million a year that we give as far as film rebates.
That is not my office.
Okay. Good answer. But it's a lot. And you're right. Yeah. So anybody else?
Yeah, I would say it's yes and. You know, I agree that like we have great stuff going on here. Was I understand the sort of feeling of like, why do we need outside validation necessarily, right? Because we know how great we are. But I would say it's that, but we also want, you know, I want someone, if there's a local company that can grow and take up an empty warehouse, I want that to happen. But if there's also a company that wants to come here and create jobs for my neighbors, I also want that to happen. So it's a yes and for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Bernina Gray. I own a little digital agency here in town. I'm remote though. But I recently completed the Rematriating Economies apprenticeship. So I'm a little familiar with like the investing space. And my question or my input in all this is that everybody's talking about Series A, Series B, bringing in corporate C-suite executives. but we're not focused on the people that are already here, you know, the resources. Everybody's talking about those big investments, but what I think that we should turn to is like micro investing in each other. And that's what I've heard from like Richard and the gentleman over there. And I think that, I mean, just supporting ourselves and thinking on a micro level and building community that's already here would be greater impact to attract outside business. And that's, to me, that's the true meaning of sovereignty in itself, you know? I mean, in all honesty, we're all living on one big reservation.
I'll just head on that note just to highlight the New Mexico Main Street program, which does focus on, you know, we have a lot of conversation today on sort of science and tech business, and they focus on exactly what it sounds like, your Main Street businesses, right? Like your mom and pop small businesses. They have the New Mexico Main Street program has existed for decades. It's very successful. It's throughout many communities in New Mexico, and they do incredible work doing just that. They are also going to be using some of our SSBCI money is going to be focused at Main Street support as well. One other thing I wanted to mention is that we're actually also going to be awarding SSBCI funding for technical assistance for business owners for like business services. So how you're navigating legal and accounting and et cetera. And that's not going to be just for your science and tech startups, but for your sort of core small businesses that are like the backbones of our communities as well. So I agree. I think both are really important.
Thank you. Last question.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. I'm reflecting on this panel as well as some of the others that came before, and taking as a given the poetry from Richard and Sandra about who we are and what we can be. I'm wondering if there's a way, if we're trying to create this ecosystem, that EDD, who needs more work, because you have not enough to do already, could maybe create some sort of an information base or database where people could find one another. Because we've got, you know, if we're going to be asking for companies to come here, they need to know that there's somebody who can do their digital work or somebody who can do their plumbing or whatever. But if there's some kind of a collaboratively focused database that says, I am in the, what was that, deep tech space, and I'm looking for other people who are in that deep tech space or people who can support my deep tech work. I think that might not only help those of us in New Mexico, but it might also provide a way for federal funds and others to say, hey, New Mexico has a way that we can deploy these funds. And that's one of the things that we're challenged with is, you know, there are large grants out there and they don't know we can handle it. We know we can, they don't. But if we have a database that EDD sponsors that says, there are these 17 companies that are in this field, how about you work with them? Then we can all work together in a proactive way. Because I knew you needed more work. Thanks.
So you all are giving me great questions to bring up all the things that I forgot to say. So one thing we're working on that is maybe not 100% what you're saying, but like 80% of the way there is we're doing resource mapping. So we're putting together essentially, this is a joint effort with another office in the Economic Development Department, putting together what is hopes to be a living resource map statewide of resources for entrepreneurs, small businesses, existing businesses, et cetera. And it is intended to be sort of an interactive, instead of just you know, a list that you sort through, an interactive process that will help guide you through what stage you're at, what you're looking, who you're looking to connect with, what your need is. So again, that's not 100% what you said, but we're moving in the same direction. So yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. And, I'll just a note, because Stacy is in this room and other people, and Stuart with wonderful resource work who have been doing that work for many, many years. So just to say that this resource map is built on the back of the incredible work that those folks have been doing and continue to do.
I'm going to add one small plug. A professor who retired from UNM started the STEM Boomerang program. I think they're their own nonprofit, but the goal was to get STEM professionals that have left the state and to give them job opportunities that might be local, that could use their skills and advancement in STEM. So there are networks out there such as that.
Great, thank you. And final question.
Yay, I get the. Okay, the microphone is on. I guess I didn't need a microphone, but my name's Neema Kamaria Hanifa Pickett. I greet you with Sawubona, which is the Zulu word for, can anyone in the room tell me? A little language skill we're going to get. So Sawubona is the deep looking into another human being's eyes and saying, I see you, I see you, I see you. And the response would always be, Yebo Sawubona. Can you all try that? Yebo Sawubona. There we go, which means I likewise see and acknowledge you and your presence and the energy you bring into space and time. And I've been kind of looking at this board going, envisioning New Mexico's future entrepreneurial economy. And I'm with the Office of Equity and Inclusion as the liaison to the Black community. And one of the questions that I've had that's come up, I've worked with entrepreneurs for the last few years in business development, but truly is that we've had an erasure, not just within the nation, but in our own borders, of who we are as a people, as Black people, African descendants, and what we bring into economy. So I heard a word several times that always, almost triggers me, where I go, capital, human capital. And we know that 74% of New Mexico businesses are white-owned. Those are male-owned, white-owned businesses, companies, and that folks of color are the ones that are doing that brunt work and that push and that labor. And so beyond seeing the capital, on the side of seeing the humanity, what initiatives do we as New Mexicans create and drive to the forefront of saying we want to see our youth be a part of leading us in the economy in the future, and developing those relationships with Black businesses specifically. A lot of times the access to capital is a huge barrier because of the fact that we may not be coming with collateral to the table. So there are all of these questions about, if you want to see those who have been marginalized as part of the process and leading into these industries, how is it that we developed industries that are no longer anti-racist and that are structured to be inclusive and diverse? Because we've been dealing for a very long time with a tricultural narrative. And so that leaves folks on the margins looking in. So I would really like to hear what the plan is, the action plan and the steps in terms of developing and including and supporting Black business and entrepreneurship throughout the state of New Mexico, and ways that we can envision a better future to support us in the economy of the state.
So at the state level, in the Economic Development Department, we have a wonderful office called, which has the best name of any state office ever, called JEDI, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office, led by the wonderful Shawnee Harvey. And that is precisely the work that they focus on, connecting business resources with communities of color and underserviced populations, and working to grow business representation for those communities and also business resources. So that work is ongoing at the state. I don't want to speak to the details of their work without myself, it's not my personal office, so I wouldn't want to speak out of turn to details that I'm not necessarily intimately familiar with. But I completely agree. I think it's perhaps an under focused, under discussed aspect of economic development and business growth. But that is something that is important at the state level and at economic development, that there is a continued focus on.
Well, that kind of wraps us up. Thank you very much. And we really appreciate everybody's attendance today. And thank you very much to this great panel. Thank you.